He was a man who had everything money could buy. The mansion he lived in was more like a small palace, with high ceilings, marble floors, and large glass windows that let sunlight pour in. Every room had a purpose and every corner reflected wealth. From the outside, it looked perfect. Inside, it was quiet, too quiet sometimes. Despite all the luxury, there was one thing missing: warmth. He had a son, a little boy with bright eyes and soft hair, who was growing up in this grand house. The boy had everything he needed: clothes that cost more than some people made in a year, toys from around the world, and meals prepared by skilled chefs. Yet something was missing. The boy often looked around the house as if searching for someone to talk to, someone to care, someone to love. The staff was large and efficient. There were gardeners, drivers, cooks, and maids, each performing their duties with precision. They had rules to follow, schedules to meet, and a strict hierarchy to respect. Among them was a maid, a quiet woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. She had worked there for years, and while she was careful not to overstep her bounds, she had always cared for the boy in a way that nobody else had. She noticed the little things, when he looked sad, when he was hungry, when he needed comfort. She was the only one who truly seemed to see him. One morning, as the billionaire walked past the kitchen, something caught his eye. He was on his way to his office, running late for a meeting, but he froze. There at the kitchen table was the maid, carefully feeding his son. The boy had a small plate in front of him, and the maid was gently holding his spoon, making sure he ate each bite. The sight shocked him. He had never seen such an act in his house without permission. Rules were rules, and no one was supposed to do anything like this without his approval. For a moment he stood silently, trying to understand what he was seeing. His initial thought was anger. How dare someone disobey the rules of his house? How dare someone take liberties with his child without asking? His heart raced, not with fear, but with the authority he always carried with him. He wanted to storm in and demand an explanation, but something made him pause. There was a calmness in the maid's actions, a softness in her voice as she spoke to his son, who was smiling faintly, feeling safe and cared for. He retreated to his office, closing the door behind him. Sitting in the large leather chair, he tried to make sense of what had just happened. He thought about discipline, rules, and the way he had always managed his household. He thought about his son, who was growing up in a house full of wealth but not enough love. And slowly, a flicker of doubt crept into his mind. Could it be that the maid was not breaking the rules but filling a gap that he had neglected? The day went on, but his mind kept drifting back to the morning. In meetings and calls, he found it hard to focus. He remembered his own childhood, the strictness he had faced, the lack of attention, and the loneliness. He had worked hard to build his empire, believing that wealth and power would protect and provide for his family. But now he wondered if he had missed something far more important. Something that money could not buy. As evening approached, he found himself walking back to the kitchen, pretending to check on some paperwork, but really wanting to observe the maid and his son. He watched from a distance as the boy played with his toys, occasionally glancing up at the maid, who smiled and encouraged him gently. He saw laughter, he saw care, he saw something he hadn't realized was missing: connection. The billionaire sat quietly, hidden from view, thinking about what he had seen. He realized that in his pursuit of perfection, he had overlooked the simplest truths. Love, attention, and care could not be bought or scheduled. They had to be given freely, sincerely, and patiently. And in that moment, he understood that the maid had been giving these things to his son every day, quietly and selflessly. He left the kitchen before anyone noticed him, but his heart was heavy with thought. He knew he needed to confront the situation, but he also knew he could not approach it with anger alone. He had to understand her motives, her reasons, and the love she had shown to his son. The man who had always relied on rules and authority was facing a challenge that money could not solve. A lesson in humanity that he had ignored for too long. That night, he sat in his study, looking at pictures of his son when he was a baby. He remembered the joy, the innocence, and the trust in those eyes. He realized that his son still had that spark, and perhaps it was the maid who was nurturing it when he could not. For the first time in years, he felt a mix of humility and gratitude. Someone had cared for his child when he had been too busy to notice. The next morning, he made up his mind. He would not rush to judgment. He would observe, listen, and understand. He would confront the maid, but not with anger. He needed to know the truth behind her actions, and he needed to reflect on his own role in his son's life. For a man who had everything, this was a new and unexpected challenge, a test of his character, his empathy, and his willingness to change. As the day unfolded, he kept stealing glimpses of the maid and his son. Each time he saw her kindness, his heart softened a little more. He realized that discipline and care were not always opposites. Sometimes they could coexist if guided by understanding and compassion. And deep down, he hoped that he could learn from her, perhaps even become a father his son could truly connect with. By evening, he called for a private moment with the maid. He wanted to speak with her, to hear her side of the story and to understand why she had taken such a bold step. He was nervous, a rare feeling for him, because he knew this conversation could change the dynamics of his household, and perhaps his own life. He wondered if he was ready to admit that he had been neglectful, that he had relied too much on wealth and authority, and not enough on love. The maid entered the room, calm and composed. She did not know that he had seen her actions that morning, and she prepared herself to answer questions, not knowing what tone he would take. She had always respected him, but she also believed in the importance of nurturing his son. Her heart was pure and her intentions were clear. She would explain honestly and simply why she had fed his son, hoping he would understand. The billionaire looked at her, trying to mask his inner turmoil. He realized that this was more than a confrontation. It was an opportunity to learn about care, compassion, and the quiet power of love. For the first time in a long while, he felt uncertainty, but it was not unpleasant. It was a challenge, a test, and perhaps a chance to become a better father and a more understanding man. He waited until the evening when the house had quieted down. The sun was low, painting the walls with soft gold, and the usual buzz of staff and chores had slowed. He called the maid to his study. She entered cautiously, her hands folded, her eyes respectful yet steady. She had worked in his house for years and knew when to speak and when to remain silent, but she did not know why she had been summoned. He motioned for her to sit, trying to keep his expression neutral, though inside he was a mix of curiosity, caution, and an unfamiliar sense of anticipation. He began carefully, asking why she had fed his son that morning without permission. The question was calm, almost gentle but firm. She looked at him, her voice steady, explaining simply that she had noticed his son often seemed hungry when he should have had meals. She did not want to disobey, but she could not bear to see him go without. She wanted to care for him in a way that made him feel safe and loved, even if it was small, even if it went unnoticed. He listened quietly, his eyes on her face, studying her sincerity. Her words were plain, honest, without any attempt to manipulate or impress. It was just truth, simple and clear. She was not asking for praise or reward. She had acted out of concern for the boy, out of love, which was something the billionaire was not accustomed to hearing in his structured, rule-bound life. The man felt a tight knot in his chest. His mind raced with thoughts. On one side, he knew rules existed for a reason. No one was supposed to act independently with his child. The thought of punishment crossed his mind briefly, but then he saw the boy in her care smiling faintly, relaxed, happy. He realized that what she had done was not rebellion or disrespect. It was care, and that care had filled a void he hadn't even acknowledged. The conversation continued. She spoke about the small things she noticed, how the boy would look longingly at the kitchen table when no one was around, how he sometimes went to bed hungry when his parents' schedules kept them away, and how he would light up when she simply asked him about his day. Every word painted a picture of a little boy longing for attention, for affection, for love, and of a woman quietly giving it to him without seeking reward or recognition. He felt a strange mix of guilt and admiration. Guilt, because he had been so absorbed in his work and wealth building that he had neglected the emotional needs of his own child. Admiration, because this woman, someone he had seen as just a part of the staff, had acted with courage, kindness, and love. He realized he had underestimated her. He had always seen people in his household through the lens of efficiency and obedience, not empathy and compassion. For a while, neither of them spoke. He thought about the structure of his household, the power he held, the rules he enforced, and he also thought about his son, the boy who deserved care and attention more than anything in the world. The sight of him that morning had awakened something inside him, a sense that perhaps he had been too rigid, too too blind to the needs of those he loved. The maid, sensing the pause, spoke again. She said she had never intended to disobey, only to protect, to nurture, and to give his son what he needed. She spoke quietly, without accusation or bitterness, and in her voice was a calm strength that made him pause even more. She was not asking him to forgive her, nor was she demanding recognition. She simply wanted her actions to be understood. The billionaire leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes briefly. Memories of his own childhood rose unbidden. The strict discipline, the loneliness, the feeling that love was conditional and fleeting. He remembered moments when he had wished for comfort, for someone to simply care. And now, looking at this woman, he realized that his son had been yearning for the same thing. He had missed the signs because he had been too busy, too focused on control and wealth. A question formed in his mind, one that surprised him with its weight. Could he allow this kind of care in his home, in his life? Could he trust someone to nurture his son in ways he had failed to do? It was not just about authority. It was about love, and love required humility, patience, and vulnerability, qualities he rarely allowed himself to show. Finally, he spoke, not with anger, but with a careful, measured tone. He asked her if she would help him understand how to be more present in his son's life. She looked at him in surprise, not expecting a question like this from a man who had always been so strict, so controlled. She nodded slowly, realizing that he was not seeking to punish or criticize, but to learn and to grow. In that moment, a bridge formed between them, a bridge of understanding, respect, and mutual care. He spent the rest of the evening asking questions, listening to her insights about the boy, about what made him happy, what made him anxious, and what he needed to feel secure. She spoke from experience, from observation, and from the heart. Her words were not just about feeding a child or attending to needs. They were about understanding, patience, and the importance of emotional connection. The billionaire felt something shift inside him. The rigid walls he had built around his life, around his household, and around his heart began to soften. He realized that love and care were not weaknesses. They were strengths that required courage and commitment, and he saw that the maid had shown him these strengths in action. As the night deepened, he made a decision. He would not chastise her. He would not see her actions as a violation of rules. Instead, he would acknowledge the care she had shown, learn from it, and allow it to guide him in becoming a better father. For the first time, he thought not about power or control, but about connection, about presence, and about the simple act of being there for his son. He left the study with a quiet resolve. The house was still, the moonlight streaming through the windows. He walked past the boy's room, peeking in to see him asleep, peaceful and cared for. The sight brought a small, uncharacteristic smile to his face. He realized that this was only the beginning, a beginning of change, of understanding, and of a journey toward being a father who was not just rich in wealth, but rich in love. The maid, unaware of the thoughts running through his mind, returned to her duties, quietly satisfied that she had done the right thing. She did not know that her actions had begun to open the heart of the man who had once seemed unchangeable, and that her courage and kindness would slowly reshape the life of the boy she cared for so deeply. The next day, things began to shift subtly. He observed her interactions with his son, noticing how the boy's face lit up, how he responded to gentle words, how trust and affection could flourish in small, quiet moments. He realized that guidance and love were not mutually exclusive. One could be strict in rules, but also tender in care. One could manage a household efficiently, while nurturing the heart of a child. And perhaps most importantly, he realized that true wealth was measured not in money or power, but in Mo. After the conversation with the maid, he could not stop thinking about what she had said. The sincerity in her voice, the gentleness in her actions, and the quiet courage it took to care for his son without seeking permission lingered in his mind. He had always believed that discipline and wealth could solve everything, but now he realized that there was something far more important: emotional presence, understanding, and genuine care. These were things that money could never buy. He started noticing little things he had overlooked before. His son would play quietly in his room, occasionally glancing toward the door as if waiting for someone. There were times when he looked hungry, not because of lack of food, but because he longed for attention, for someone to acknowledge his small victories or comfort his little worries. He remembered mornings when he was rushing to meetings and leaving his son to be cared for only by rules and schedules. The realization hit him like a wave. He had been absent, emotionally absent even though he was physically present in the house. The next few days he observed the maid closely. He watched the way she guided his son through simple tasks, how she encouraged him to speak, how she celebrated small accomplishments, and how she handled his tantrums with patience rather than irritation. He noticed how his son's face lit up when she praised him, how he leaned in for a touch, a smile, a word of encouragement. It was a small world, quiet and unassuming, but it was full of life and warmth. He realized that his son was learning from her not just how to be polite or obedient, but how to feel, how to trust, and how to experience care. And he knew deep inside that this was something he had failed to provide. He felt a pang of guilt, a deep ache that reminded him of moments in his own childhood when he had wished for the same kind of attention, the same quiet love. He had built walls around himself, believing they were protection, but now he saw that walls also kept out the very things he needed most. Slowly, he began to try small changes in his behavior. He started by sitting with his son during meals, asking simple questions, listening to the answers. He learned to slow down, to notice the little things that mattered to a child. The way a toy was arranged, the way a story made him laugh, the expression on his face when he felt proud of something. At first it felt awkward. He was not used to this kind of presence, to giving attention without expectation, to caring without control. But he persisted, remembering the maid's example. He also began speaking more with the maid, asking for advice on how to understand his son's needs. She guided him patiently, explaining that children required consistency and care, gentle encouragement, and the freedom to express emotions without fear. She did not lecture him, nor did she patronize. She simply shared what she knew, and in doing so, she opened a door for him to enter a world he had long ignored, the emotional world of his child. The billionaire found himself reflecting on his own habits, his own upbringing, and his own shortcomings. He recognized patterns he had repeated, times when he had prioritized work over family, efficiency over empathy, authority over love, and he felt a determination to change, not because someone told him to, but because he wanted to. He wanted his son to feel safe, cherished, and understood. He wanted to be the father his child deserved. Over the next few weeks, he and his son began to spend more time together. They would walk in the gardens, play simple games, and share stories. The boy began to open up, speaking about his day, his feelings, and his small fears. The billionaire listened, offering advice when needed, but mostly offering attention and presence. He realized that these moments were more valuable than any business deal, more enriching than any possession he owned. They were moments of connection, of trust, of love. The maid continued to play a quiet role, supporting them both. She would guide the boy gently, helping him express himself while encouraging the father to participate actively. Her influence was subtle but powerful. She had taught the billionaire that true authority was not about control, but about understanding, and true strength lay in compassion. He saw this every day in the small interactions he witnessed between the maid and his son, and he tried to emulate it. One afternoon, the boy fell ill. He had a fever, and his usual energy was replaced by lethargy and discomfort. The billionaire, for the first time, felt a raw fear he could not ignore. He stayed by his son's side, holding his hand, reading to him, and making sure he felt safe. He noticed the maid preparing remedies, soothing words, and gentle care, and he followed her example. Together, they created an atmosphere of comfort and reassurance. It was a moment that changed him deeply. He understood fully what it meant to nurture, to protect, and to care without reservation. As days passed, he saw the effect of this care on his son. The boy smiled more, laughed more, and seemed more confident. He was no longer the quiet, longing child who waited for attention. He was thriving, responding to love, and learning trust. The billionaire realized that emotional investment, patience, and kindness had a power that wealth alone could never achieve. He began to appreciate the maid's role even more, seeing her not just as a staff member but as a teacher, a guide, and a bridge to understanding his own son. This period also gave him time to reflect on himself. He thought about his relationships, his priorities, and the legacy he wanted to leave behind. He understood that material wealth could create comfort and security, but emotional connection created life, joy, and resilience. He recognized that he had been focused on the wrong measures of success, and he began to shift his thinking. Success, he realized, was not in accumulation but in care, not in dominance but in empathy, not in control but in understanding. One evening, he watched the maid reading a story to his son, her voice soft, her expressions animated, and her eyes full of warmth. The boy was completely engaged, hanging on every word, his face radiant with wonder. He realized that this scene was a lesson, a living example of what he had missed and what he could now embrace. He felt a profound respect for her, a gratitude that went beyond words. She had shown him what it meant to be human, to nurture, and to connect. From that day, he made a conscious effort to integrate these lessons into his life. He spent more time with his son, guided him with patience, and learned to listen. He learned to celebrate small victories, to comfort in moments of fear, and to be present without distraction. The household began to change. There was warmth where there had been formality, laughter where there had been still. He decided to take action, but it was not the action anyone would expect. He would not punish the maid, nor would he scold her for stepping outside the rules. Instead, he wanted to embrace what she had shown him. The next morning, he called her privately and spoke with a tone that carried respect and gratitude. He told her that he had seen her care, and he wanted to learn from her how to nurture his son. She listened in surprise, her eyes widening slightly, but she nodded slowly, understanding that this was an unusual request from a man of his authority and stature. He began to participate more in his son's daily life. He helped him get ready for school, encouraged him during play, and even tried simple tasks like helping him with homework. At first, his attempts were awkward and unfamiliar. He stumbled over his words, unsure how to approach his son, and often wondered if he was doing more harm than good. But the maid guided him quietly, offering advice when needed, and gradually he found a rhythm. He started to see the joy in his son's eyes, the sense of trust, and the feeling of being truly seen. The household began to shift as well. The staff noticed the change, the warmth that started to flow where once there had been formality and silence. The billionaire was more present, more patient, and more willing to listen. He celebrated the small victories, his son's laughter, his curiosity, his willingness to share thoughts and feelings. These were moments he had never valued before, but now they became the focus of his attention. The maid continued to play a subtle but essential role. She supported the boy, encouraged trust, and guided the father. She never overstepped boundaries. Instead, she acted as a bridge, showing the man how to connect emotionally without losing his sense of authority. Her actions were a lesson in balance, how to combine care, respect, and love in a household that had once been governed solely by rules and control. One evening, the billionaire invited his son to join him in the garden. The boy hesitated at first, unsure of this new attention, but slowly he walked beside his father. They talked about the small things, a flower in bloom, a bird on the branch, a funny cloud in the sky. The conversation was simple, but it carried immense weight. For the first time, the boy felt that his father was not just present physically, but emotionally as well. And the father realized that these small moments were more important than any deal or decision he had made in his life. The change was not without challenges. Old habits and expectations occasionally resurfaced. He would find himself slipping into authority-driven behaviors, checking schedules, enforcing rules, and focusing on efficiency. But the moments he spent with his son reminded him of what truly mattered. Slowly, the new patterns began to replace the old. He learned to pause, to listen, to offer encouragement, and to share laughter. He discovered that patience was a strength, and that vulnerability could foster trust and connection. The boy flourished under this new environment. He became more confident, more expressive, and more joyful. He laughed freely, explored new interests, and sought his father's attention without hesitation. The billionaire saw the transformation and understood that his presence, combined with the maid's care, had created a foundation for his son to grow emotionally and socially. It was a partnership that transcended roles and titles, built instead on love, understanding, and respect. The billionaire also began to reflect on his relationships with others. He realized that the lessons he was learning at home could apply elsewhere, in his business, his friendships, and his interactions with colleagues. He saw that empathy, patience, and understanding could create stronger connections and more meaningful outcomes. He started to integrate these lessons into his professional life, listening more carefully, offering support where needed, and valuing collaboration over command. One day, The boy came running to him, excited to show something he had drawn. The father knelt beside him, examining the picture with genuine interest, asking questions and praising the effort. The boy beamed, proud of his work and proud of his father's attention. It was a small moment, but it symbolized the change that had taken place. The bond between them was growing stronger, built on shared experiences, trust, and emotional openness. As time passed, the billionaire noticed that the maid's influence extended beyond her direct actions. Her quiet example of care had reshaped the household culture. Other staff members began to adopt similar approaches with the boy, offering encouragement, kindness, and patience. The home became a place where rules were balanced with empathy, and authority was tempered with understanding. It was a transformation that no amount of wealth or control could have achieved alone. He also took steps to recognize the maid's contributions. He spoke to her privately, expressing gratitude for her dedication, courage, and wisdom. He acknowledged that her actions had taught him valuable lessons about fatherhood, empathy, and human connection. She accepted the acknowledgement with humility, not seeking reward but understanding that her efforts had made a difference. The bond between them evolved into one of mutual respect and trust, a partnership that supported the growth and well-being of the boy. One afternoon, the billionaire and his son sat together in the library reading a story. The boy asked questions, shared thoughts, and laughed at the funny parts. The father listened, responded, and encouraged exploration. He realized that these moments were the foundation of his son's emotional development, moments that would shape his character, confidence, and understanding of the world. He felt a sense of fulfillment that wealth had never provided, a quiet satisfaction that came from being present and engaged. The change also affected the way he viewed himself. He discovered a capacity for care, patience, and emotional connection that he had not acknowledged before. He realized that vulnerability was not weakness, but a strength that allowed him to connect, to guide, and to nurture. He saw that true authority was built on respect and understanding, not fear or control. These insights transformed not only his relationship with his son, but his perspective on life, family, and the legacy he wanted to leave behind. The household continued to flourish. The boy grew more confident. The staff became more engaged and empathetic, and the father discovered a deeper sense of purpose. The maid remained a quiet guide, offering wisdom and care, while the billionaire embraced his role as a loving, present parent. Together, they created an environment where emotional growth, trust, and love could thrive. He began to see that the lessons learned from the maid and his son were universal. They could apply to all aspects of life, in business, relationships, and personal development. He recognized that empathy, patience, and understanding were powerful tools that could create lasting impact. He made a commitment to carry these lessons forward, not just within the walls of his home, but in every interaction and decision he faced. One evening, as he watched the boy fall asleep, he reflected on the journey they had taken together. He thought about the morning he had discovered the maid feeding his son, the conversations that followed, and the changes that had occurred since then. He realized that the shock of that moment had led to transformation, not just in his son's life, but in his own. He felt gratitude, humility, and a deep sense of fulfillment. He knew that the journey was ongoing. There would be challenges, moments of doubt, and times when old habits would reemerge. But he felt confident that the foundation had been laid, a foundation built on love, understanding, and human connection. He understood that wealth could provide comfort, but it could never replace the power of emotional presence, the impact of care, and the lasting influence of trust. In the quiet of the night, he felt a profound sense of purpose. He had discovered that true success was not measured by money or power, but by the ability to nurture, guide, and connect with those who mattered most. He had learned that authority could coexist with empathy, that rules could be balanced with care, and that love could transform even the most structured and disciplined environment. The boy slept peacefully, unaware of the depth of change occurring in the heart of his father. The maid continued her duties quietly, her influence felt in every corner of the home. And the billionaire, once focused solely on wealth and control, had begun to embrace a new understanding of life, a life where connection, care, and love were the true measures of legacy, and where the lessons learned from the unexpected act of kindness would continue to shape their lives for years to come. and connection where there had been distance. He also began to understand the maid's role differently. He saw her not as an employee but as a partner in raising his son, someone whose perspective was invaluable. He respected her boundaries and her guidance, understanding that her care was not a threat to his authority, but a model of love and attention he could follow. He began to communicate with her openly, sharing his thoughts and learning from hers. Their relationship evolved into one of mutual respect, collaboration, and trust. The changes were not instantaneous, nor were they easy. He had to confront habits, patterns, and expectations he had long held. He had to navigate the tension between his old ways and the new understanding he was building. Yet he persisted, motivated by the joy he saw in his son's eyes and the peace he felt in witnessing genuine care and connection. In these moments, he discovered the true value of emotional presence. He realized that a child's happiness was fragile, dependent not on material wealth but on attention, patience, and unconditional care. He understood that the maid's actions had taught him something far beyond feeding a child. They had taught him the importance of being human, of being present, and of valuing the quiet, often unnoticed acts of love that shape a life. By the end of this period, he had transformed in subtle but profound ways. He was more patient, more observant, and more willing to connect. He had begun to rebuild his relationship with his son on a foundation of understanding and affection. The maid's role had been pivotal, and he acknowledged it privately, appreciating her courage and wisdom. Together they had created an environment where love, care, and connection could flourish. He knew there was still much to learn, but he also knew that he had taken the first important steps. He had begun to value presence over control, understanding over authority, and love over rules. In doing so, he had discovered a part of life that money could never provide, a part that was far more rewarding and enduring. And as he watched his son play, laugh, and thrive, he felt a quiet contentment he had never known, a contentment born not of wealth, but of connection, understanding, and the transformative power of care. Months of connection, trust, and unconditional care. By evening, he called the maid again, this time to thank her quietly, not in a grand gesture, but in a way that acknowledged her courage and her heart. She looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his tone, and nodded with a faint smile. It was a small moment, but it carried immense meaning. In that exchange, they both understood that boundaries could be respected, rules could be upheld, and yet love could still flourish. That night, he sat alone in his study, reflecting on the events of the past 2 days. He realized that he had been blind to the simplest truths, that his focus on wealth, power, and control had blinded him to the needs of his own family. And he understood that change would not be instant, that learning to be present, to care, and to connect would take time and effort. But for the first time, he felt willing to take that journey. The man who had always been in control, who had relied on authority and wealth, now felt a new sense of humility and purpose. He knew that he had a lot to learn, but he also knew that with guidance, observation, and an open heart, he could begin to give his son what he truly needed: love, attention, and a safe, nurturing presence. And perhaps in that process he could also rediscover a part of himself he had long forgotten, the capacity to care deeply, to trust and to connect with the people who mattered most. Time passed, and the changes in the household became more profound and noticeable. The little boy had grown more confident, joyful, and expressive. He laughed freely, shared his thoughts, and sought the presence of both his father and the maid. His world, once filled with silence and formality, was now alive with warmth, trust, and love. He no longer hid behind his toys or waited anxiously for attention. He thrived, knowing he was seen, valued, and cared for. The billionaire had transformed as well. He had learned that authority and empathy could coexist, that care could guide discipline, and that love was not a weakness but a strength. He had begun to participate fully in his son's life, offering guidance, comfort, and encouragement. He celebrated the small victories, the laughter during play, the pride in a completed drawing, the joy in learning something new. These moments, once trivial in his eyes, became the measure of true success. The maid continued her quiet role, supporting and guiding both father and son. She never sought recognition or praise, but her influence was evident everywhere. She had taught the billionaire not just how to care for his son, but how to be present, patient, and emotionally connected. Her actions had created a ripple effect, transforming not only the child's life but also the heart of the man who had once been distant and cold. One day, the billionaire decided to take a small, meaningful step to show appreciation. He called the maid to his office, offering words of sincere gratitude. He told her that her courage, wisdom, and kindness had changed his life and the life of his son. He acknowledged that without her, he might never have realized the importance of presence, care, and emotional connection. She accepted his words with a quiet nod, her eyes reflecting the satisfaction of knowing she had made a difference. The father and son continued to build their bond. They shared daily routines, special outings, and quiet moments at home. They laughed together, talked openly, and supported each other through challenges. The boy's confidence grew, and he began to explore new interests, ask questions, and express himself without hesitation. The billionaire felt a sense of fulfillment that money had never given him. He understood that true wealth was measured in connection, trust, and love, not in possessions or power. The household culture also changed. Other staff members noticed the transformation and began to adopt similar approaches with the boy. Encouragement replaced strictness, patience replaced impatience, and kindness became a natural part of daily interactions. The home, once ruled solely by schedules and rules, had become a place of warmth, laughter, and mutual respect. The billionaire realized that the lessons he had learned from the maid and his son could influence not just his family but everyone around him. One afternoon, the boy approached his father with a drawing. It was a picture of their family in the garden, smiling and holding hands. The father knelt beside him, examining the drawing with genuine interest, asking questions and praising the effort. The boy's face lit up with pride and happiness. The father realized that this simple moment reflected the journey they had taken together, the growth, the trust, and the love that had developed over time. The billionaire also began to see the long-term impact of the maid's guidance. His son was learning not just manners or obedience, but empathy, kindness, and confidence. He saw the boy interact with others, share and express compassion. These lessons, taught quietly and consistently, would stay with him for life. The father felt immense gratitude for the maid, understanding that her influence had created a foundation for his child to become a caring, confident, and resilient person. He also reflected on himself. He realized that he had discovered a part of himself he had long forgotten, the capacity to love deeply, to be patient, and to connect emotionally. He understood that vulnerability was not a weakness but a strength that allowed him to guide, nurture, and inspire. He saw that true leadership, whether in a household or in life, required empathy, understanding, and care. These insights transformed not only his relationship with his son, but also his view of the world and the legacy he wanted to leave behind. The changes extended beyond the walls of the home. The billionaire noticed that his interactions with colleagues, friends, and acquaintances were becoming more thoughtful, empathetic, and genuine. He listened more, appreciated the perspectives of others, and valued collaboration over control. The lessons he had learned about care and presence were shaping the way he approached life in all areas. He realized that the maid's quiet influence had not only impacted his family, but had also inspired a broader transformation within him. One evening, as the boy lay in bed, the father sat beside him reading a story. They laughed at the funny parts, discussed the lessons, and shared thoughts about their day. The boy felt safe, loved, and valued. The father felt fulfilled, connected, and proud. The maid, quietly organizing the room, smiled softly, knowing that her care had played a vital role in this transformation. It was a moment of quiet triumph, a testament to the power of kindness, courage, and love. The billionaire often reflected on the journey that had begun with a single act, the maid feeding his son when he could not. That small, unexpected gesture had changed everything. It had opened his heart, taught him the importance of emotional presence, and created a bond with his son that was unbreakable. He understood that sometimes the simplest acts of care could have the most profound impact.